je Khenpo Sodargye mi yang so ne monum Khenpo nya Bakar Targam Santo Shermardo, Tomba Tuji Janla Kisham Sar, Nijar Sergi Jangamsa, Jawar Tuji Shala Yella, Jimin Punzo Jala Soran, the Gorgia Tombambo, Shinjir Lo.
The Dharma, infinitely profound and subtle, is rarely encountered even in millions of eons. Now that I have seen it, heard it, and held it, I vow to realize the Tathagata's true meaning. To liberate all sentient beings, please give rise to the Supreme Bodhichitta. Today we will continue our teachings on entering the middle way. This text is incredibly important. You know, many Buddhists today feel like they don't need to study too much. They think it's enough to just learn a few basics or simply complete the 500,000 preliminary practices, studying a bit about bodhicitta, refuge, and the difficulty of finding a precious human birth. They might think this is enough. For some, if their faith is truly rock solid, that might actually work. If someone practices well, they could even attain liberation in this very life just by practicing guru yoga. That does happen. But for the vast majority of us, the wrong views and misconceptions in our minds are deeply rooted. Without a very powerful wisdom to strike at those roots and pull them out, it's hard to overcome our deep-seated ignorance, doubts, and distorted views. Without that wisdom, developing a truly unshakable faith in the Buddha and his Dharma is a real challenge. That's why I believe it is absolutely necessary for many people to study the deeper side of the middle way, as well as the teachings on prajnaparamita and logic. This is essential. Our Buddhist students are actually quite bright. They do a great job learning Madhyamaka, prajna, and even modern technology and science. They're very talented. Since people have such sharp minds, we shouldn't be afraid of learning too much. In the old days, some non-Buddhist schools used to say, don't learn too much. The more you know, the more trouble you'll have. So they said it's better not to study deeply. But the Buddha later clarified that it's not that having too much knowledge is harmful. It's that learning things in a shallow, incomplete way is what makes it meaningless. If we learn deeply, even if we learn a lot, it could still be meaningless. But if we learn well, like the Buddha, who attained omniscience and understands every single phenomenon in the world, every aspect of samsara and nirvana, does that wisdom cause him more suffering? Not at all. There's no such fault. Look at Manjushri or the great lineage masters of the past. Their wisdom was far greater and sharper than ours, yet they didn't end up with heavy afflictions just because they studied too much. That never happened. Let's not even talk about others. Take Khenpo Agon, for example. Even after his enlightenment, he continued to study the 5 great treatises, including how to practice entering the middle way. His biography makes this very clear, so don't be afraid that learning too much will block your practice. Some teachers in the past said you shouldn't study too much because it becomes a cognitive obscuration that hinders liberation. Honestly, that's just wrong. This kind of statement is completely mistaken. They don't understand what a cognitive obscuration actually is. Wisdom isn't an obstacle. Wisdom is the sharpest sword we have to cut through ignorance. So we need to study these various profound treatises. It's essential. Life is so short. I really hope that we Buddhists don't just stay stuck on a few simple texts or sutras or a single piece of advice forever. If we do, we might never develop a truly deep, certain understanding of the Dharma. Compared to the great masters of the past, we might think we are well read and learned, but honestly, we are quite narrow-minded in comparison. Compared to the great masters of the past, how many treatises or sutras has the average person really studied in a lifetime? How many have they truly mastered? Life is really short. If life were longer, I'm sure we'd all be interested in learning much more. But it always feels like there isn't enough time. I remember the 5 collections of Madhyamaka that we discussed yesterday. There's a master named Tsoshi Lodan who wrote a commentary. I've carried that commentary with me for many years, always wanting to translate it. Very few people in the Chinese Buddhist tradition today truly understand Nagarjuna's 6 collections of reasoning. Even in the Tibetan tradition, there aren't many. I received the transmission for these in the past. I heard that Khenpo Tepa used to teach them at Domang Monastery. At the time, when I saw Tsoshi Lodan's commentary, he lived during Mipham Rinpoche's time, and Mipham Rinpoche actually corresponded with him. They had some exchanges. He was a brilliant master from the Daofu area. He had tremendous wisdom. At the time, I wanted to translate his commentary on the 6 collections, but I just don't know if I'll ever have the time. I suppose I'm insatiable when it comes to the Dharma. especially when it comes to the teachings, whether it's studying, listening, or translating. I'm deeply passionate about it. I'm sure many people are tuning in now to listen to Entering the Middle Way because, as usual, whenever a new teaching is announced, everyone gets excited. That's how we are. We all rush to listen. Many people will come, but after the initial excitement, things usually go one of two ways. Some people will stay from beginning to end, taking it very seriously. They'll probably take notes on all the key content, consult other related commentaries, and really see it through to the end. Others might just be tourists listening while they eat or drink, just casually going through the motions. That's a possibility. And then there are those who start with great passion but fade out halfway through. They don't really go deep in their listening. It's basically like listening to a pop song. Of course, sometimes for people living in cities with jobs, with life and work demands, all sorts of situations exist. In that case, listening even a little is better than nothing. At least the attitude toward learning is right. But if you truly want to master the middle way and you have the time and energy, I strongly suggest you study it thoroughly. In the learning process, I'm also planning to provide everyone with the auto-commentary translated by Master Fazun. I'll make it available to you all. At the same time, Khenpo Tepa also wrote a commentary primarily based on the auto-commentary. If you have time, you should check out other related commentaries as well. Set a goal for yourself right now and make a commitment. I will finish this entire teaching. In the process, I will consult these commentaries. I'll read these commentaries at least once, twice, or 3 times. When we were studying the Middle Way back in the day, we put every ounce of our energy and time into it. We were willing to devote everything to it. We were so fascinated and had so much faith. I remember my classmates back then all had their favorite celebrities, stars like Leslie Cheung, Andy Lau, or Liu Xiaoqing. My classmates were like that. But I remember thinking that while they loved those stars, I loved Master Chandrakirti, Nagarjuna, and Shantideva. In our hearts, they far surpassed any worldly celebrity, great figure, or star. We were completely captivated by their wisdom. I've always felt that if you come into this world and don't understand the meaning of the middle way, you haven't really grasped the heart of the Buddha's teachings. I still believe that today. Being a Buddhist is more than just taking refuge or becoming a monk or nun and keeping precepts, though those are wonderful and part of what the Buddha taught in the Tripitaka. Such conduct is rare and precious, especially in this degenerate age. But more importantly, as a follower of the Buddha, you should try to grasp at least some of the meaning of prajna paramita and the luminous nature of wisdom. You should at least grasp some of this. If you don't, it's a bit of a pity to just be a practitioner in name only. It's like a person who lives in a wealthy household with tremendous assets, including lots of gold, but the owner doesn't actually possess the most valuable parts. They might think they own the house because they have the building. They think they're the real owner of this home, but actually the most precious thing inside, the most valuable, unchanging thing, is the gold. It's like that. If you don't possess the most precious thing inside and you only have the physical building or your name on some paperwork, you're not really the true owner. So, as true Buddhists, we should aim to gain some realization of prajna in this short life, at least some understanding of prajna thought. Now, when I say realization, I don't necessarily mean the deep realization of a first-level bodhisattva who sees the ultimate emptiness beyond all extremes, the deepest emptiness free from the 4 extremes and 8 elaborations. But even if you haven't reached that point yet, you should aim for what Entering the Middle Way describes, having genuine, uncontrived compassion, bodhichitta, and non-dual wisdom in your heart. At the same time, you should also have some realization of the true prajna thought. Without that, just doing some charity work or looking like a monk is a bit hollow. It reminds me of the story of Lord Atisha meeting 2 monks. They were getting along quite well at first, but the moment Atisha started talking about the Heart Sutra, one of the monks literally covered his ears and ran away. Atisha later said that if you don't understand the true ultimate reality, simply holding on to the external image of being a Buddhist doesn't have much meaning. It's the same way today. Among us Buddhists, there are all kinds of people practicing virtue. Some spend their time in study and contemplation. Some chant sutras every day, some are working through their preliminary practices, and others have taken monastic vows. All kinds of people practicing virtue. But every one of us needs to look inward and ask, Do I understand the true meaning of prajnaparamita and emptiness? You don't necessarily have to wait until you become a first ground bodhisattva to grasp this. Even at our level, as ordinary beings on the path of accumulation or the path of preparation, we can fully understand the nature of emptiness through general images or conceptual understanding. If you possess a view that is unshakable, one that cannot be taken away or altered by others, if you have such a view, then you can be called a true Buddhist. We often see this in the scriptures. For instance, a bhikshu of ultimate meaning is considered a true monk, while a conventional bhikshu is a monk in name only. It's the same logic here. A person who truly understands the teachings on emptiness is a real Buddhist. If you know absolutely nothing about the methods of emptiness, or if the luminous nature of wisdom is a complete mystery to you, then you are just holding on to an external image. There are plenty of practitioners in the lesser vehicle, or even in non-Buddhist schools, who maintain very pure discipline, all kinds of pure discipline. Some wandering ascetics are even more diligent in their precepts than we are. So the key point is this: in this short life of yours, have you realized the thought of prajna? You must reflect on this. When the Buddha was nearing his parinirvana, he spoke to Ananda. He said that after his passing, if other teachings were lost or forgotten, it wouldn't be a total disaster. But he insisted that not a single word of the prajnaparamita should ever be lost or forgotten. It must be protected and upheld above all else. When the Buddha was nearing parinirvana, that was the Buddha's most profound final advice to Ananda. So, for all of us practitioners who follow, look at yourselves. Have you truly understood these prajna teachings? Prajna is essentially another word for Madhyamaka, the middle way. As we discussed yesterday, it's all about the middle way. Sometimes we use a lot of words to describe it, but the question is whether you can realize the actual meaning. When we talk about the Madhyamaka of the expressed meaning, we should understand it in terms of ground, path, and fruit. The Madhyamaka of the non-dual ground, which is the union of the two truths. The path, non-duality of the two accumulations. The fruit, the non-duality of the two bodies. You should understand it this way. Speaking of the two truths, regarding the ultimate truth, when you use wisdom to analyze any phenomenon, you find it is free from the 4 extremes and 8 elaborations. This is the ultimate truth. Then there is the relative truth. In the relative truth, nothing exists except as a false dream-like illusion. It doesn't exist at all. That is what we call the relative truth. But in the actual basic state, or the true reality of all things, these two truths are not separate. This is the non-dual ground. We need to know that the essence of all things is empty, and their nature is dreamlike. Appearances exist, but they are not real or solid. They cannot withstand any deep analysis. You can say it this way. Alternatively, as Mipham Rinpoche explains in the Wish-Fulfilling Treasury, in the difficult points of the 18th chapter, true Madhyamaka is the emptiness of the ultimate truth, free from the 4 extremes, while the relative truth is the luminous essence, the unconditioned luminosity. These two aren't like 2 separate strings twisted together. They are fundamentally non-dual. When you gain a certain unshakable understanding of this, you could say you've realized the ground Madhyamaka. Then there is the Madhyamaka of the path, which is the non-duality of the 2 accumulations. Throughout the entire process of practice, on the level of appearance, we engage in the 6 paramitas and 10,000 virtues, as if in a dream. This is the accumulation of merit. Yet the essence of every single bit of that merit is empty of the 3 spheres. It cannot be found as a solid thing. This is the accumulation of wisdom. So in the process of the path, appearance and emptiness are a complete union. It's not just appearance here and emptiness there. The accumulations of wisdom and merit are completely integrated. It is a state that is perfectly balanced without leaning to either side. When you realize that state, it's called the path Madhyamaka, the non-duality of the 2 accumulations, or you can say the union of the 2 accumulations. When we truly attain the state of Buddhahood, that fruit consists of nothing other than the form body and the Dharma body. The form body manifests in various ways before sentient beings. For instance, before pure beings, it appears as the pure Sambhogakaya to provide benefit. Before impure beings, it manifests as the Nirmanakaya to help them. Yet all these diverse manifestations are actually non-dual with the Dharma body. In their essence, they are like the moon reflected in water. Although the 27 enlightened activities of a Buddha are spontaneously accomplished and flow without interruption for the sake of those to be tamed, they possess no solid reality whatsoever. This is what we call the fruit of the two bodies, the union of the form body and the Dharma body. So throughout the entire framework of ground, path, and fruit, what is the single thread that connects everything? It is the principle of appearance without self-nature. On the surface, there are appearances. If we speak from a deeper level, these are the manifestations of luminosity. From our perspective as ordinary beings, they are dreamlike appearances. Whether we are talking about the ground, the path, or the fruit, this concept that things appear yet lack inherent existence runs through the entire system. From the beginning to the end, one must understand the union of appearance and emptiness, the union of the two truths. We speak of the union of the two truths at the ground, the union of the two accumulations on the path, and the union of the two bodies at the fruit. This is a very important matter. Therefore, when we discuss the Madhyamaka of the expressed meaning, that meaning is essentially the union of appearance and emptiness. This union of appearance and emptiness, the Buddha explained this very clearly. Now it is up to us as followers to see if we can recognize this when we perceive all phenomena. This is the ground. Not a single thing in existence falls outside of this basic state of the union of appearance and emptiness. Then moving to the path, from chanting a single mani mantra, or saving a life all the way up to attaining enlightenment. Everything prior to Buddhahood is also essentialized as appearance without self-nature. Finally, when Buddhahood is actually reached, the goal is to benefit infinite sentient beings. At that point, a dream-like Buddhahood benefits dream-like sentient beings. This too is the union of appearance and emptiness. At all times, we should use this meaning to investigate. After investigating, we realize, oh, so from start to finish, everything is appearance without self-nature. This is Madhyamaka. In the eyes of sentient beings, all sorts of things appear, but when we truly use wisdom to analyze these appearances, there isn't a single truly existent thing or phenomenon to be found. In a certain sense, we can talk about a Madhyamika, or a master of the middle way. The greatest masters of the middle way would be Shakyamuni Buddha, as well as figures like Master Chandrakirti, Nagarjuna, and Shantideva. They truly understood every phenomenon within the ground, path, and fruit as clearly as if they were holding an amala fruit in the palm of their hand. They understood everything perfectly. Someone like that is called a Madhyamika. Among followers today, regardless of whether you are a monastic or a layperson or what your status is, anyone who has truly realized these teachings can be called a Madhyamika. Your identity doesn't matter, your status doesn't matter, whether you are from Africa, the Americas, or Asia, whatever kind of person you are. If you realize the true reality of all things, you are a Madhyamika. This is what a Madhyamika is. Now, this Madhyamaka, this meaning of the middle way, is what we call the Madhyamaka view. A view refers to a settled, certain way of thinking. This is called the Madhyamaka view. So what is the Madhyamaka view? It is an unshakable, certain realization of the non-duality of appearance and emptiness, or the meaning of the middle way, within the ground, path, and fruit. This is called the Madhyamaka view. As to whether you have this view, you don't need to ask others. You should know for yourself. Have you mastered what the Buddha taught in the various Prajna Paramita Sutras? Have you realized these teachings? As I mentioned, there are two kinds of mastery. One is the realization of a Bodhisattva, and the other is the awakening of great masters. The awakening of these masters doesn't necessarily mean they have all reached the first or 10th Bodhisattva ground or the 10th ground, but they have gained an unobstructed, complete mastery over the entire meaning of the Buddhist path. That can be called awakening. Once you have that perspective, we can call it the Madhyamaka tradition, the Madhyamaka view, or the certain realization of the middle way. This is very important. Everyone should check, are you a Madhyamika? If so, do you have the Madhyamaka view within you? Do you possess the thought of prajna? When this view is expressed through words and sentences, it is called a Madhyamaka treatise. If it is expressed in the form of scripture, it is a Madhyamaka sutra. Madhyamaka sutras. So we shouldn't treat Madhyamaka as something simple. In the past, we were very interested in it, but that interest often manifested as a love for debating which school accepted what and who was right or wrong. While we were debating, we might have even created some negative karma with me siding with one school and you with another. That happens in debates. But what is truly important is for each of us to have a deep personal understanding of the middle way. This is very important. I also rejoice greatly that many of you are studying the root stanzas of the middle way. I truly appreciate your dedication. I've looked into it and sometimes visited the rooms of practitioners to see how they tutor one another and hold discussions. I've gotten a general sense of how things are going for the most part. People's interest in Madhyamaka is strong and their study is continuous, which is wonderful. But for some, it's mostly just talk, just playing with words. Whether they actually have the Madhyamaka view within them is hard to say. Everyone should work hard and use every method possible to secure this view in their own mind. Once you have it, you won't have doubts or wrong views about the Buddha's teachings. The problem with some people is that they study very well for a while, but then after some time they become just like worldly people again. This usually happens for two reasons. One is that they didn't truly realize the meaning of emptiness. If you truly realize the truth, you won't just give it up on a whim. Once you see the reality of things, you don't just walk away from it. The other reason might be that your mind isn't embraced by great compassion, so you lack the drive or interest to benefit others. That is also a factor. So everyone should really take the time to focus on these teachings of the middle way. Many of us say we are busy, but being busy doesn't necessarily mean we are doing something meaningful. Most of that time is actually spent sleeping, being distracted, or playing on our phones. If you added up all that wasted time, it would be quite significant. I've been encouraging everyone lately to see if they can manage to listen to at least 1 or 2 lessons a day. If you truly fight for that time, it shouldn't be a problem at all. However, some people start out very diligent but can't maintain it. Gradually, they just slip back into the ways of worldly people. The root of all these problems is that the Dharma has not merged with the heart. If the Dharma deeply integrates into your heart, you certainly won't give it up or abandon it easily. You should all keep this in mind, even if you fall into laziness or distraction, or if various afflictions arise and make you want to quit. The conditions today are so convenient. You can save these audio and video files almost instantly. Back when we were studying, if we had the convenience you have now, we would have been absolutely overjoyed. Back then, external conditions were very difficult, but from a personal perspective, my confidence in the middle way was very strong. Because of that faith, perhaps a bit of certain realization arose within my mind. That became the driving force that has kept me from ever giving up, and I am still working hard at it today. So, I truly hope that through this teaching of entering the middle way, a genuine certain realization of Madhyamaka can arise within your own minds. This is very important. As I mentioned before, there are actually quite a lot of books on the middle way. There are quite a lot. There are many in the Tibetan tradition and some in the Chinese tradition as well. But in our Tibetan tradition, well, life is just so short. Otherwise, I had planned to explain the commentaries on the root stanzas of the middle way and the 400 stanzas on the middle way. Fortunately, I have already taught the 400 stanzas on the middle way. You see, the 400 stanzas on the middle way and the root stanzas of the middle way are what we call general Madhyamaka. They don't differentiate between the Svatantrika and Prasangika schools. They represent the middle way in a general sense. Then there are others called specific Madhyamaka. Some great masters even include the Madhyamaka teachings of Kamalashila and Shantarakshita within the broader Madhyamaka tradition. Like the Karmapa Mikyo Dorje, he also placed these two within general Madhyamaka. Usually when we categorize specific schools, the Prasangika view, according to the perspectives of Master Bhutan and many others, is what we discussed the day before yesterday. Texts like Clear Words, Entering the Middle Way, and the Buddha Palita commentary. These all represent the Prasangika perspective. On the other hand, the Svatantrika view is represented by works like The Adornment of the Middle Way and Bhaviveka's Prajapradpa, Lamp of Wisdom. These all represent the Svatantrika Madhyamaka view. Broadly speaking, after Master Nagarjuna composed the root stanzas of the Middle Way, Master Buddhapalita explained it according to the Prasangika perspective. Later, Master Bhaviveka explained it from the Svatantrika perspective. Then Master Candrakirti refuted Bhaviveka's positions to once again propagate the viewpoint of Buddhapalita. I remember one great master even said that Candrakirti was actually the reincarnation of Buddhapalita. He literally said that, one great master said this, that he returned to this world specifically to propagate his own previous views, composing Entering the Middle Way in clear words to continue teaching the Prasangika Madhyamaka perspective. In the Jewel of Clarification, a commentary on the wisdom chapter of the Bodhicaryavatara, we also mentioned that in India, these classifications of Prasangika and Svatantrika didn't really exist. These divisions likely began in Tibet. In the Tibetan debating courtyards or in the debate halls, these two perspectives, Prasangika and Svatantrika, people debate them every single day. But now that I've reached this age, I feel that these debates aren't quite so vital. When I see sentient beings suffering in the heat of their struggles, suffering from depression, anxiety, various mental afflictions, at a time like this, whether it's the Prasangika view or the Svatantrika view, they are both fine. For many years now, I haven't paid much special attention to those differences, especially now when all sorts of wrong views and misconceptions are spreading and surging among people. There are other perspectives that might be even more critical. These days, the most crucial issue is how people are so deeply attached to their very practical, mundane views. Just then, there was some noise because someone nearby was renovating their house, and the noise was quite loud. I had to go settle that. Now we are continuing. I'm not sure exactly where we left off, but let's get straight to the subject. In teaching Entering the Middle Way, we have finished the title and the translator's homage. Now we move to the second part, the actual meaning of the treatise. This is divided into three sections. The homage as a branch of composing the treatise, the body of the treatise itself, and finally, the concluding activities after composition. Divided into three sections. First, regarding the homage as a branch of composition, this is divided into two parts, a general discussion on the causes of a bodhisattva and a specific praise of great compassion. Divided into two parts. Let's look at the general causes of a bodhisattva. As usual, I will recite the Tibetan verse first and then explain it in English. Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas are born from the Able One. The Buddhas are born from the Bodhisattvas. The causes of these heirs of the Buddha are the mind of compassion, non-dual wisdom, and the spirit of enlightenment. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with this verse. This verse should be very familiar. The meaning is quite straightforward. The author, Master Candrakirti, begins by praising the causes of a bodhisattva. Literally, the meaning is quite simple. Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, who are also called middle Buddhas, are born from the Able One, the Buddha. And where does the Buddha come from? He is born from the Bodhisattvas. And the Bodhisattvas, where are they born from? They are born from great compassion, non-dual wisdom, and Bodhichitta. Born from these three. This outlines a kind of order of emergence for all these realized beings, the causal relationships. In modern society, people might not know the exact definitions of Shravaka, Pratyeka Buddha, or Bodhisattva, what Buddha and Bodhisattva mean. This is conceptual knowledge, so I hope you take the time to look those up or find out through other means. Essentially, it means that all enlightened beings in this world, whether they are the hearers, Shravakas, and solitary realizers, Pratyeka Buddhas, of the lesser vehicle, or Pratyeka Buddhas, or the Bodhisattvas and Buddhas, all of them ultimately arise from great compassion, non-dual wisdom, and bodhicitta. This is why, as Buddhists, we are constantly encouraged to cultivate compassion and non-dual wisdom and to cultivate great compassion. What is the purpose? If we want to reach the state of a Buddha or Bodhisattva, this sequence is vital. So if we understand this literally in a simple way, first let's talk about Shravakas. A Shravaka is someone who hears the voice of the Buddha and then through their own study and practice spreads the sound to others. Such realized beings are called Shravakas. These are the Arhats of the Vaibhashika and Sautrantika traditions. These are called Shravakas. Now you might ask, don't Bodhisattvas also hear the Buddha's words? Why aren't they called Shravakas? While Bodhisattvas do receive such teachings, the name Shravaka here refers to a specific designation. The Shravaka mentioned here, we also quoted in the auto commentary. In the Lotus Sutra, it says that at that time, the Shravaka realized beings heard the Buddha expound the path to enlightenment and then transmitted it to others. For this reason, we call them Shravakas, also called transmitters of sound. Did these Shravakas also listen to Mahayana teachings? They did indeed. Among the Shravaka Arhats at that time, quite a number of them listened to both lesser vehicle teachings and greater vehicle teachings. But does listening to Mahayana teachings make them the same as Mahayana realized beings? Not really. They just listened. They didn't focus their practice on bodhicitta or the vast benefit of sentient beings. This is explained very clearly by quoting the Lotus Sutra. These are called Shravakas. Then we have the middle Buddhas mentioned here. Middle Buddha refers to Pratyeka Buddha. Why call them middle Buddhas? Actually, there are several types of Buddhas. One is the lesser Buddha, the Shravaka, because they have eliminated the obscuration of the self of persons. The middle Buddha is the Pratyeka Buddha, who not only realizes the selflessness of persons, but also part of the selflessness of phenomena. And the great Buddha is a true, fully enlightened Buddha like Shakyamuni. So here we use a special term, calling Pratyeka Buddhas middle Buddhas. What are these middle Buddhas? They also depend on the Buddha's teachings to reach their realization. What kind of realization? You might have heard that Pratyeka Buddhas achieve enlightenment on their own when there are no Buddhas or Shravakas or other spiritual teachers around. Do they just naturally become Buddhas and achieve realization directly? Not really. According to the 400 stanzas on the Middle Way and the root stanzas of the Middle Way, these Pratyeka Buddhas also relied on spiritual teachers in the past. They listened to the Buddha's instructions and later became final birth beings. When they are in their final birth, by contemplating the 12 links of dependent origination, they achieve realization on their own. So the middle Buddhas and the Shravakas, that is the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, what is their source? Their source is actually the able one. The able one. Sometimes we call the Buddha the able one, sometimes the capable sage, sometimes Shakyamuni Buddha, and so on. So the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas in this world, what is their source? They are born from the Buddha. How? Because the Buddha, at whatever time, first turns the wheel of Dharma. They practice according to the Buddha's teachings and eventually attain the fruits of Shravaka and Pratyeka Buddha. So the Shravakas and middle Buddhas are born from the able one. That is the reason. The able one here refers to the Buddha. And where does the Buddha come from? The Buddha is born from the Bodhisattva. Why is the Buddha born from the Bodhisattva? Actually, there are two aspects to this. One is like Shakyamuni Buddha. At the beginning, during his causal stage, Manjushri Bodhisattva encouraged him to give rise to Bodhichitta. Then he began to develop Bodhicitta. It was through that Bodhisattva cause that he attained Buddhahood. This is one aspect. The second aspect is that every Buddha, during their time on the causal path, was a Bodhisattva for a long period. So there are these two kinds of causation. One is that someone encouraged them, and the other is that they themselves went through the Bodhisattva stage. Therefore, the Buddha is born from the Bodhisattva. The Buddha arises in dependence on the Bodhisattva. Everyone should understand this. This kind of, how should I say that, this pattern is a bit circular sometimes when you look at it. And we will also praise these Bodhisattvas here. Why do we praise them? The Buddha, including in the Ratnakuta Sutra and related scriptures, praises the Bodhisattvas first and then praises the Buddhas. Why? Because they are the cause. Like certain Indian traditions at that time, they would first prostrate to the new crescent moon. For those who worship the moon, they prostrate to the crescent. And for those who especially revere medicinal trees, they worship the seedling of the medicinal tree. Using this analogy, prostrating to a bodhisattva and prostrating to a Buddha are really no different. Therefore, it is said here that the Buddha actually originates from the bodhisattva. The reason they originate from the bodhisattva is that the related scriptures often praise the bodhisattva. The reason for praising the bodhisattva is that the source of the Buddha is the bodhisattva. Just as we often praise Prajnaparamita, the mother of Buddhas, emptiness. Why do we praise Prajnaparamita? because all four types of noble beings attain realization through prajnaparamita. So the cause is also very important. We often praise our spiritual teachers and gurus. Why do we praise them? Because through the guru's instructions, we have been awakened. So in all of human society, in its natural laws, causation is very important. Causes and conditions are very important. Therefore, here it is explained that the source of the Buddha is the Bodhisattva. So below, Master Candrakirti first praises what? He praises the causes of the Bodhisattva. The reason is the same. This is one aspect. Then regarding the Bodhisattva just mentioned, where does the Bodhisattva come from? For those who have studied entering the middle way before, this is relatively simple. For those who haven't studied it, you must understand this pattern. Sravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas are born from the Buddha. The Buddha is born from the Bodhisattva. So where does the Bodhisattva come from? It says here, great compassion, non-dual wisdom, and bodhicitta are the causes of the heirs of the Buddha. Heir of the Buddha and Bodhisattva mean the same thing. The latter part says heir of the Buddha, the former says Bodhisattva, but in fact they both mean Bodhisattva. So what are the causes of the Bodhisattva? The causes of the Bodhisattva are actually great compassion, the wish for all sentient beings to be free from suffering and to attain happiness. This kind of mind, we will also discuss this great compassion later. There is compassion focused on sentient beings, compassion focused on phenomena, and objectless compassion. So I won't elaborate here. Great compassion is very important. Then non-dual wisdom, the auto-commentary, also explains wisdom free from the four extremes and 8 elaborations. In fact, the 6th chapter of Entering the Middle Way focuses extensively on non-dual wisdom. And Bodhicitta, in the Nagarjuna's precious garland, it is compared to a mountain king. In the precious garland, all 3 of these causes are mentioned. It says Bodhicitta is the root, like a mountain king. Compassion pervades the 10 directions, and wisdom doesn't depend on the 2 extremes. These are the causes of the heir of the Buddha. So these 3 are the causes of the Bodhisattva. So now why do we especially emphasize bodhicitta, non-dual wisdom, and great compassion? It is already explained in Entering the Middle Way. These are the causes of the heirs of the Buddha. Regarding the causes of the heirs of the Buddha, there are also different views among some great masters. Actually, I don't really want to the different views of great masters, because when great masters have different views, some of us who don't understand debate say, I follow this one, I follow that one, and really cling to it. But actually these great masters also, in order to help us truly develop wisdom, manifest in appearance various illusory debates. In reality, they are not especially attached to their own schools, but to help us develop wisdom and make that wisdom stable. So we rely on independent, autonomous wisdom to investigate with that purpose. They manifest some debates. If we cite these debates regarding the heir of the Buddha here, is this heir a first ground bodhisattva or someone who hasn't yet reached the first ground? Generally, when we give rise to bodhicitta, we are also called heirs of the Buddha or bodhisattvas. Which of these 2 is it? On this matter, there is also some debate in the Tibetan tradition. I remember it should be in the Illuminating the Intent by Tsongkhapa. But now regarding the Illuminating the Intent, it's been over 30 years since I've seen it. At that time, the copy of Illuminating the Intent I saw was quite long and very light. That's how the Tibetan version was. The Chinese version was brought to me from Chengdu's Zhaozhui Temple by a Dharma friend named Shikai sometime in the 90s. I still have that copy. When I get back, I should show it to everyone. In that Illuminating the Intent and in these Madhyamaka texts, Tsongkhapa says that the bodhisattva here should be a bodhisattva who has not yet reached the grounds, and in other words, a beginner bodhisattva. Why? Because what is explained here, non-dual wisdom, bodhicitta, and great compassion, are all attained before the ordinary stages. So the bodhisattva here, he uses an analogy, including the medicinal tree analogy and the moon analogy. These are all directly taught by the Buddha in different sutras as analogies for beginning bodhisattvas. Using these as analogies, he feels that the heir of the Buddha doesn't necessarily refer to one who has reached the grounds. It could be someone who hasn't reached the grounds yet but has bodhicitta, or non-dual wisdom, such a realized being. Later, Gorampa of the Sakya school, he has a text called Dispelling Wrong Views, which is also a commentary on Entering the Middle Way. In it, he has some refutations of Tsongkhapa's view. Then, when establishing his own school's position, he says that the heir of the Buddha mentioned here should refer to a first ground bodhisattva and upward. What is the reason? One is that regarding the analogies just mentioned, he uses other reasoning to explain them. Also, in entering the middle way, we generally discuss the 10 bodhisattva grounds. Regarding the first ground bodhisattva, from that point on, having obtained that realization, one is truly designated by the name bodhisattva. This line, the name bodhisattva here, one is only called bodhisattva after having the realization of the first ground. It is not an ordinary beginner's designation. So usually we use the name bodhisattva, like in the way of the bodhisattva. If bodhicitta arises in one's mind stream for even an instant, from that moment one is called a bodhisattva. But this refers to a bodhisattva in terms of conduct. Here it refers to a bodhisattva in terms of view. So the heir of the Buddha here should refer to a bodhisattva in terms of view. So he believes that the bodhisattva accepted here is actually from the first ground upward. The causes for that would be the path of accumulation and the path of preparation, non-dual wisdom, bodhicitta, and great compassion. These are the dharmas of the path of accumulation and the path of preparation. These three dharmas, the dharmas of the path of accumulation and the path of preparation. So generally, in Khenpo Tepa's commentary, also basically following Mipham Rinpoche's view, it is said that the noble ground mentioned here also refers to the first ground bodhisattva. But if that's the case, the three dharmas mentioned here, great compassion, bodhicitta, and non-dual wisdom, are actually included within the path of accumulation and the path of preparation. But we absolutely must not think that these three dharmas all belong only to the path of accumulation and the path of preparation. Don't think that. From the first ground upward all the way to Buddhahood, they are never abandoned, the path of accumulation and the path of preparation. At the time of the path of accumulation and the path of preparation, these three dharmas are indispensable. From the first ground all the way to the 10th ground, non-dual wisdom is there, great compassion is there, and bodhicitta is also there. Why? Because these three dharmas are the most fundamental dharmas that run through all 10 bodhisattva grounds for all Mahayana bodhisattvas, the most fundamental dharmas. So, according to Mipham Rinpoche's outline, it is the same. Originally, I wanted to prepare to translate Mipham Rinpoche's teachings of Kandrakirti. His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche transmitted it once before. In that text, the meaning is also quite similar to Gorampa's. So, at this point, does this contradict Tsongkhapa's view? There is no contradiction. It's just a matter of focus. Why? Because what Tsongkhapa said can indeed be said. If we are talking about an heir of the Buddha, the causes of the heir of the Buddha can also be on the path of accumulation and the path of preparation. If it is a bodhisattva on the path of accumulation, then before that they were someone who hadn't yet aroused bodhicitta, an ordinary being who hasn't entered the path. In their mind stream, these three dharmas become the causes for the path of accumulation and the path of preparation bodhisattva. Once they reach the first ground bodhisattva, these three dharmas also become their preceding causes. So the heir of the Buddha here, in my personal view, I cannot compare myself to those great masters. Nowadays, many people say, Tsongkhapa thought this way, and I think this way. That kind of tone is very inappropriate because we have no way to be mentioned in the same breath as these great masters. But in terms of our own shallow understanding, actually, the heir of the Buddha here, on the one hand, as Tsongkhapa explained, if someone hasn't reached the grounds but has given rise to bodhicitta. The three preceding causes are also very important. On the other hand, regarding the causes of the first ground bodhisattva discussed in this treatise, these three dharmas are also very important. So these two should have no major contradiction. In our study of this dharma, we must first realize that Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas arise from Buddhas. Buddhas arise from bodhisattvas, and bodhisattvas arise from these three factors. For each of us, whether you aspire to be a bodhisattva in the future or are acting as one now, you can never abandon these three causes. Otherwise, if you abandon these three causes, it is difficult to say if your bodhisattva path might decline. So, as true Mahayana practitioners, we must place great importance on these. Regarding the three causes of a bodhisattva mentioned by Master Kandrakirti, some masters such as Karmapa Mikyo, Dorje and others structure their outlines to show homage to great compassion, sometimes dividing it into general and specific homages. There is this division. Oh, wait, that might not be correct. What I just said might be a mistake. Let's just disregard that part. Next, we move to the next verse. Originally, I wanted to cover more today, but I seem to be a bit. Next, we discuss the specific praise of great compassion. Previously, we had the general praise for the causes of a bodhisattva, general discussion of the causes, and now we specifically praise great compassion. This is divided into two, praising great compassion without distinctions and praising great compassion with distinctions. Regarding the praise without distinctions, compassion alone is the seed for the Buddha's harvest, the water that makes it grow, and the ripening fruit that yields long-term enjoyment. Therefore, I praise compassion first. To explain this, compassion's nature refers to the very essence of great compassion. Its essence is so vital that Master Candrakirti chooses to praise it first. Among the three causes, Bodhichitta and non-dual wisdom were not singled out for praise because great compassion is the foundation. Without it, no Mahayana Dharma can be established. Therefore, Master Candrakirti begins by praising great compassion. On one hand, this is a homage verse, paying homage to great compassion. On the other hand, praising great compassion. Why is great compassion so crucial? Because the nature of great compassion is essential in the vast and boundless enjoyments of the Buddha. It is absolutely crucial. In the result of the Buddha's vast enjoyment, or in the enjoyment itself, it is vital at the beginning, middle, and end, three stages. How is it vital? It says initially it is like a seed. At the very beginning it is like a seed, extremely important. Without great compassion, you honestly can't get anything done. Think of it like a seed. For it to grow in the middle, it needs water, just like irrigation. And finally, for it to be useful over the long term, it has to ripen, much like a harvest coming in. These metaphors are key. First, the seed represents the initial driving force. For sentient beings, this is the most important part. Then the water represents the continuous nurturing and long-term effort. Water is used as a metaphor. Finally, after reaching Buddhahood, you benefit others for a very long time. This ripening is used as a metaphor. Actually, this ripening isn't just a one-time thing. It's like, how do I put it? A ripening like a wish-fulfilling jewel, a constant, inexhaustible source of dharma. That's called ripening. Candrakirti uses three specific terms here, like, as, and if. These three different comparisons to describe these stages of comparison. That's why Candrakirti says, first, I pay homage to great compassion. If we analyze it, compassion is vital at the beginning, the middle, and the end. The reason it's important, first, great compassion, as the Precious Garland says, the great vehicle starts with compassion, followed by stainless wisdom. If someone doesn't accept these two, anyone with a heart who abandons them, that would be quite foolish. It's like having a heart and just throwing it away. Anyone practicing the Mahayana must first have compassion. Some people today only study the fundamental wisdom of the middle way and skip the way of the Bodhisattva entirely. They have zero compassion for others. Honestly, that doesn't make sense. If you truly realized ultimate emptiness, compassion would arise naturally. But generally speaking, as a Mahayana practitioner, you must develop in your mind stream a heart that wants to free countless beings from suffering, this compassion. If you have this compassion, all your Mahayana actions will follow naturally. Without this engine, if you will, if you don't have that drive at the beginning, if you don't have the seed of compassion, whether you're keeping precepts, giving, or meditating on selflessness, these things exist in basic Buddhism and even non-Buddhist traditions. That's not the core point. In Mahayana Buddhism, if you want to reach the level of a bodhisattva, you need compassion. Without it, whether you're doing complex visualizations or deity practice or constant charity work, the seed is missing. This seed, this drive, that's what's important. I've noticed this with many Dharma friends. Sometimes we study at the academy for years, but later they lose the drive to benefit others. They just can't keep going. It's because their compassion isn't deep enough. If your compassion is deep enough, you truly won't give up. Why? Among His Holiness's disciples, there's a considerable group now who, no matter what happens, keep working incredibly hard at teaching the Dharma and guiding beings. They persevere through every stage. What's the reason? The engine of great compassion. This compassion is truly vital. In a technical sense, here it might be. a cause for a first Bhumi Bodhisattva. Without compassion for a first Bhumi Bodhisattva, according to Gorampa, it's the cause for first Bhumi. Or if we aren't at first Bhumi yet, for anyone starting on the path, compassion is the fundamental seed. I think for us too. Without the seed of compassion, if I ask you to help out or do anything, without that engine, you just won't have the strength. You might do it for a little while. We see this with many volunteers, many Khenpos and Khenmos. The other day, there was a Khenpo who went back home and handed his group over to someone else. On the surface, he claimed, I want to study something else, but really, he just didn't want to teach or work anymore. What's the reason? The initial compassion wasn't strong enough. Without enough compassion, he didn't have. This is why compassion is essential at the start. Only with compassion as a foundation does whatever you do have that seed. Think of it like a tree or a medicinal tree. If there's no seed, nothing grows. Without the fundamental seed, the first thing, compassion is like a seed. It's incredibly important. That's the first step. Second, if you lose that compassion along the way, over the long haul, you won't be able to sustain your resolve to help others. It's impossible. For example, if we encounter something now, it's impossible to keep doing it for your whole life. Take masters like His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok and many great masters of his generation. No matter the era, no matter what happened, their dedication to helping beings never stopped. If their compassion had been weak back then, what would likely have happened? Oh, we're already over our 30 minutes, aren't we? I'll wrap this up quickly. What would likely have happened? They'd have given up midway, fallen into a Shravaka or Pratyeka Buddha state. It's okay. In a very short time, you'd get sidetracked by other circumstances, so compassion is the moisture. A tree needs water to keep growing. It relies on this condition continuously. Without this condition, it can't grow long term. So I think many volunteers, many Mahayana followers, without great compassion, wouldn't even start at the beginning. In the middle, they wouldn't be able to persevere in working for sentient beings. The most fundamental cause for perseverance is great compassion. Why do some people now, when it comes to benefiting others, work tirelessly without a single thought for themselves? It's simply because of great compassion. Finally, once we reach Buddhahood, the benefit we provide to others becomes continuous. Does compassion disappear after reaching Buddhahood? No. While at that time there might not be obvious referential compassion, non-referential compassion remains forever. Because of that non-referential compassion, in the realm of sentient beings, the turning of the Dharma wheel and helping of beings never stops, as it says in the prose section of the King of Aspiration prayers. Because of sentient beings, bodhisattvas have compassion. Because of compassion, there is bodhicitta, and because of bodhicitta, there is enlightenment. It says this. So we should all realize that great compassion is something everyone should take seriously. Without great compassion, you don't even feel for people when they suffer. You just practice for your own selfish reasons. Whatever you do, you don't think of sentient beings. But if you truly have this great compassion throughout your whole life, among the masters I've known, I haven't met a huge number of masters, but of the older generation I knew, like Khenpo Tepa, I was telling a Dharma friend about. Khenpo Tepa, truly, from when I first met him until he passed away, every time I talked to him, he was always focused on benefiting others. His whole life was like this. He had no other concerns beyond that. His own comfort and life, while he appeared to attend to it, it wasn't his priority. It wasn't his main focus. So we should see that once bodhicitta is in your mind stream, the drive to help others will be there. With that drive, you will persevere. With that perseverance, through this condition, the fruit of benefiting others ripens easily. It's like a farmer who continuously first plants the seed, then waters and nurtures it, and finally enjoys the harvest. When the crops come in, everyone enjoys the abundant harvest. It's inexhaustible and can be enjoyed freely. This is also a relationship of cause and effect. So it might look like what's being discussed in the introduction to the middle way is Chandra Kirti paying respects to bodhisattvas, but actually this message is vital for our real lives, for benefiting others in practice. Great compassion is extremely important. Later we'll discuss the view of emptiness, but regarding this view of emptiness, non-Buddhist traditions talk about it too. Many people today talk about it, but without great compassion. Even realizing emptiness, these people might not Sometimes I think some who study Madhyamaka now, studying Madhyamaka is great, but the key is I ask them to first study the way of the Bodhisattva, develop compassion, then study emptiness. When the view of emptiness combines with compassion, this is called the womb of compassionate enlightenment, as discussed in the precious garland and also quoted in the commentary. This is so important for everyone. Compassion and emptiness are inseparable. If you have this, your practice will succeed. And even if you don't succeed, it's okay. Sometimes I think I spend all my time translating and teaching, so I have no time for my own meditation. But I feel that's fine. I'm not doing this entirely for myself and for fame or wealth. It's not like that. If even one sentence from these texts helps someone else, even if I don't succeed in my own practice, practicing that bit of altruism is the greatest practice. So please value great compassion. Because in the introduction to the Middle Way, the later sections focus heavily on emptiness, but before this emptiness, there are key points. First, the three causes of a bodhisattva. These three qualities are very important. Second, among them, great compassion is most important. So he generally praises great compassion. Next, I'll break it down and pay homage specifically. After categorizing, I'll explain the types of compassion to you. Okay, we'll stop here for today.
Bandara Banma Sadar